We're going to get started. Okay, so good morning. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. So let's actually I have to open the email. So the point is that yesterday we learned a Mishnah that discussed that noted that even if you were prohibited via a neder to benefit from somebody, notwithstanding that, you could still have that person offer, if that person was a Kohen, he could still offer sacrifices on your behalf. And this prompted the Gemara to ask a very related question, which is, are Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash the agents of those who offer sacrifices, or are they the agents of God who receives the sacrifices? So that's the question that the fundamental question that the Gemara began with. And at this moment, we have noted, initially the Gemara said, oh, maybe it means that they're the agents of God because various sacrifices are acceptable. And then we said, no, if you take a look carefully at the sacrifices that are listed, it's only certain sacrifices that this Kohen, from whom we have prohibited ourselves to derive benefit, that he can offer on our behalf. Not every sacrifice. And we distinguished between those sacrifices of a mechusar kapara. Now, this is a very confusing pair, because on the one hand, mechusar kapara literally means somebody who is lacking atonement. And yet, when it's being used by the Gemara, it's used as somebody who is just missing the offering of a korban in order to be able to A, go into the Beit HaMikdash, and B, eat from korbanot. So those are the two things that a mechusar kapara can't do, but he has effectively, there is no requirement for tshuva, for redemption, for repentance at this point. He's already done whatever is necessary. So, and a mechusar kapara applies to the following categories. It applies to a zav, meaning a man who has an unnatural flow, a zava, a woman who sees blood not at the time of her menstrual cycle, or not in an inconsistent manner with her menstrual cycle, a mitzora, somebody who has the religious leprosy, whether that person is male or female, and a woman after she gives birth. Once they have done the necessary waiting associated with their condition, they are, and all that's left for them to do is to bring this sacrifice. That sacrifice is called a mechusar kapara. That they're called a mechusar kapara, and that sacrifice, those are the sacrifices that are mentioned in our Mishnah that can be brought. Now, what's interesting is that we have a statement that says that specifically those sacrifices do not require the knowledge and intention of the owner. So if I am a mechusar kapara, I'm in one of the categories. So whether I was a mitzora or a zav, but and Stan says, listen, I want to do David a favor. I want to bring this korban for him because I know that that's good. Meaning it's an okay korban. I don't need to have any knowledge or involvement in it at all. And we learned that yesterday from the fact that the Torah said the word Torat, that in connection with the sacrifices that are offered, the Torah says the word Torat, and we learn from that not only that the person that even if the person is a minor, they also are going to be a mechusar kapara, and of course a minor can't have any intentions, and their knowledge doesn't really count as anything. And so as a result, we say, given the fact that a mechusar kapara who's a minor, we can offer a sacrifice on the child's behalf, so too we can offer a mechusar kapara sacrifice on behalf of somebody who is not a child even if they don't know and weren't involved. And the Ran distinguished between mechusar kapara and other sacrifices, noting that these sacrifices are not offerings to atone for sin. And so as a result, that's why you don't need any intention. You're not trying to fix something in yourself. There's no again repentance aspect to them. And so on the other hand, the other sacrifices do require some level of intention. And so that's where we're up to at this moment. We've explained our Mishnah as actually supporting the concept that the Kohanim are agents of the one who offers the sacrifice, because if they were not agents of the one who offered the sacrifice, if they were the agents of God, well, then anybody should be able to they should be able to offer anybody's sacrifice, because even if I've sworn off benefiting from a particular Kohen, if they're only the agent of God and not my agent, well, then they should be able to bring any of my sacrifices. They're not giving me a benefit. They're there as God's agent. So that's where we're up to as we begin at the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. And so we made that refinement at the end of the day yesterday. And so now we're going to ask a question on it and try to argue that the limited scope of saying that this should only apply to mechusar kapara is mistaken. So let's take a look. So Meisiv Rav Shimi bar Abba, Im Haya Kohen, we have a brisa that is going to serve as a basis of our question. That if there's a Kohen, Yizrok alav dam chataso, and he goes, and again, we're going to assume that the context is that that this is a Kohen from whom benefit has been sworn off. So Yizrok alav dam chataso, he's allowed to sprinkle the blood of the sin offering, the dam ashamo, and the blood of his asham offering. And presumably at the moment, we're assuming that this is a regular sin offering, a regular asham offering. Most times when you offer an asham, it is because you are unsure whether you did a sin by accident. So you did some step, you weren't sure whether, it turns out that there was some meat out there that was not kosher, and you didn't know that it was not kosher, and you had no basis to know that it was not kosher, or you may have even known that it was not kosher, but you forgot about it, and you took it out, and you took it up, and you put it up, and you ate it. Now, that would be a situation where you'd offer a sin offering. But what if there were two pieces out, and one was kosher and one was not kosher, and you're not sure which one you took from? Then you would offer an asham offering. If you eventually found out that you ate the wrong one, you'd offer a sin offering as well. It highlights how we need to know exactly what we're doing, that we should always be paying attention to our actions. But in any event, so that point is that it seems like a Kohen from whom you've sworn off benefit is allowed to offer these sin offerings for you. So the answer is no. Dam chataso shel mitzora v'dam ashamo shel mitzora. No, when this statement in this brisa was referring to a chatas and an asham, it was not referring to the chatas and asham of a regular sinner. It was referring to specifically the chatas and asham that are offered by a mitzora. And as a result, diksiv zos tiyet toras ha-mitzora, that this is the law of the mitzora, namely that ben gadol uben katan. It doesn't make a difference whether the mitzora is a minor or an adult. We are obligated to bring the offering for them. And so as a result, their knowledge is not important. And we are still consistent with our Mishnah. We have not disproven the point that we made that we made from our Mishnah, namely that the only ones who can bring a korban, if you've sworn off benefit from a Kohen, the only korbanot that Kohen can bring for you are the mechusar kapara offerings. Yes, that's exactly the point. 100%. The bottom line is that in the end, what we are saying is that the Kohanim. Now, I will note that there's another Gemara elsewhere that says that the Kohanim are the agents of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, because there's also a concept that the agents shouldn't be able to do anything that you can't do yourself. In general, an agent is not allowed to do, if you can't do X, then your agent can't do X for you. So the point is that in the end, there's some kind of combination that for an ordinary korban, they're an agent of God to some extent, and but they're definitely also partially an agent of of people. But in the case of the mechusar kapara sacrifices, they don't need to be your agent, and so as a result, they're only effectively the agent of God. Okay, so Tanan, we've learned in a Mishnah. So again, we're challenging whether, how Kohanim can be agents of the people. So Tanan, HaKohanim shepiglu b'mikdash. If we have a Kohen, let's just back up and remind ourselves what pigul is. Pigul is if I have in mind that when I offer my sacrifice, that I'm going to do something, I'm going to eat it or burn it at the wrong time, the sacrifice is not valid. So even though my actions are totally valid, only my thoughts were off, the sacrifice isn't a good sacrifice. And so what happens if the Kohen has the wrong intention? The Kohen is thinking, I'm going to burn this 2 days from now, not a day, not tonight, or tomorrow, or whenever I'm otherwise required to burn it. So the point is that that makes the item pigul. So the question is, so what happens? What is his liability to the one who offered it? So mizidin chayavim. If he does it intentionally, so then the Kohen has ruined the korban that you brought, and so obviously he owes you the money for that Kohen. So that is what the Mishnah says. And what's the implication of that statement? Hashogagen paturin. The implication is that only if you did it intentionally, does the Kohen. Only if the Kohen did it intentionally is he going to be liable. If he did it unintentionally, he's not liable. So Ella shepikulan pigul. But yet we say, notwithstanding the fact that they didn't do it intentionally, maybe he thought it was one type of korban and it's a different type of korban, and so as a result, he had the wrong time frame in mind. So the bottom line is that it's still pigul. So now, if you say that this Kohen is really only the agent of God, pigul on pigul, it makes sense that it would be pigul because there was something that he did wrong, and he's the agent of God. He's not your agent. So he did something wrong, and so as a result, there's something faulty in the sacrifice. But but if he's the agent of the person who brought the sacrifice, on my pigul and pigul, why should their pigul intentions make the item pigul? Lay, you should be able to say to them, the owner should be able to say to them, Shlicha shavisich l'sakune v'lo la'avuse. I sent you in order to help me, not to make things worse. And so as a result, meaning there's a concept in serving as an agent, that if I appoint you as my agent and you completely mess up my agency, then I can tell you that you weren't really my agent because you didn't do the thing that I would ask you to do. I asked you to help me. You harmed me. So and so as a result, maybe even in the case of Shogi, he should be liable. Exactly. And yet we said he's not liable. So doesn't that show that he's not, in fact, the agent of the one who's bringing the offering? And so the Gemara answers, no, Amri Shiny Gabi Pigul. Pigul is different. De Amar Kra Lo Yechashev Lo. It should not be considered for him, meaning it's using a passive voice. Mikol Makom. It doesn't make a difference how it ended up happening. So there's a special Xeris HaKasav, essentially, that says that as a result, it is pigul. So that is those were the challenges, and the bottom line is we have an end. We end here. That's the end of the conversation about whether or not Kohanim are the agents of God or the agents of humanity. And so we have proposed that they're the agents of humans, of the person who's bringing the korban, and we've tried to challenge it, but we've been unsuccessful. And again,
Who wins that battle?
so the answer is that when the Kohanim work in the Beit Hamikdash, they effectively are both the agents of the people and of God. They work for both of them. They work both for God and for people, because there's another Gemara that says specifically they must be the agents of God. And so as a result, you put these two together, and for all the karbanon except for the mechusar kapara karbanon, they clearly must be the agents of humans as well. So now let's take a look, and now we're going to look at Rabbi Yochanan's statement that I mentioned at the beginning, because Gufa Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hakol Trichen Das Chutz Mechusar Kapara, that every kind of korban requires the owner's consent and knowledge, except for the mechusar kapara situations. Shaharei Adam Mevi Karban al Banav al Banosav Haketanim, because the people can bring a korban for their minors, and so the Ran here asks a very interesting question. So let's take a look at the Ran. It is the Ran Gufa. It's about 15 lines up in the Ran on the left-hand side of the page. So Hikshu b'Tosfos. In Tosfos, it asks the following question. This is a question that Tosfos asks in Seches Kedushin. Hatanan umaisi la beperak ha'ish mekadesh behema shenimtzes mirushalayim lemigdal eder zecharim laolos. That, and then it continues to say, and nekevot l'shlamim, that if you find an animal in Yerushalayim, or meaning towards the Beit Hamikdash, and you find this random animal that must have gotten away from its owner, if it's a male animal, we're going to assume that it's going to be an ola, and if it's a female animal, we're going to assume that it should be a shlamim. So how can we do that? We just said that every korban except for a mechusar kapara requires the knowledge and intention of the owner, and yet here we have a random found animal, and we are going to bring it on the owner's behalf. So how could that happen? Kolomar v'yikravu, and so the implication is that it's brought. Alma ein strichen das. So that implies that you don't need knowledge of the owner, right? Because I'm bringing the korban of the owner that korban was lost. The Tirtzu and Tosfos answers there, the Hasam Shiny, that case is different. The Kevan Shenebad, because it was lost, Das Balim Hu Shekol Kohen Sheyirtzu Lahakriv Yakriv. That the idea is that when the person loses the korban, his intention will be that whoever should find it should bring it. Again, if it's a male, then it would be brought as an ola, and if it's a female, it would be brought as a shlamim. And so, as a result, that was the intention of the owner. But I thought that was an interesting question, and again, it highlights the interesting aspect that the Ran serves both as like a Rashi commentator and a Tosfos commentator on our Masechet. All right, Elamiata. So now we have this statement of Rabbi Yochanan again, that all sacrifices require the intention except for those for a mechusar kapara. So el miata yavi adam chatas chelev al chaveru. Well, 1 second. If the basis of being able to offer a sacrifice for somebody is because there's a category of people that you can offer a sacrifice who lack any ability to have intention, shouldn't we allow somebody to bring a sin offering for somebody who eats chelev? Because shekain adam maybe al ish shota. Because if a man's wife has lost her ability to think clearly, and she becomes the category of a shota, of some level of insanity. So, Rabbi Yehuda, we have a statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Rabbi Yehuda explained that when it came to a sin offering, a man could offer an offering on behalf of his wife. So, or at least some kind of offering, he can offer his offering on behalf of his wife who is insane. So Alama Amar Rabbi Elazar, and yet we have a statement of Rabbi Elazar, that if you tried to bring a sin offering for somebody else, you didn't bring anything. The Ran explains that this is a concept of that we seem to be learning. That we learn efshar mi'i efshar. That what we're learning is that when it comes to a child, there is no other possibility to bring it from other than to bring the sacrifice on their behalf. There's no way to squeeze in some kind of intention on their behalf, and because they're not capable of having fully formed intention and fully formed knowledge. And so we're going to learn from them where it's impossible to a situation where it's possible. And we'll say that just as we can do this for a mechusar kapara who's a child, we can do it for even a mechusar kapara who's an adult, that we don't need their intention. So we're learning from a category of cases that where there's no alternative to an ordinary human being, an adult who has the possibility, and yet we'll say that because a mechusar kapara works for a child, we're going to say that a mechusar kapara can work for an adult as well. And so we're trying to now say, well, similarly, given that a chatas can work for a potentially woman who's insane, shouldn't we say that with respect to another? And the fact that we're not saying it, doesn't that undermine Rabbi Yochanan's teaching? So no, we don't have to say that this undermines Rabbi Yochanan's teaching because Ishta Shota Hechidami. What's the case of the woman who went insane? So if she ate the chalev while she was insane, well then la bas karban she doesn't have to bring a sin offering in the first place. Meaning, when we say that one is has to bring a sin offering, it's only when a person is fully capable. If they're not fully capable, then they don't have the obligation to bring a sin offering. And this woman is not. So, if in fact she ate when she was fully capable and then she became incapable, so Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So it was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Achol chalev v'hifrish karban. If somebody ate chalev and then they separated a carbon for them, v'nishtata, and then they became insane, they became incapable, v'chazar v'nishtapa, and then they regained their sanity. Puzzle, that offering is no longer qualified because once it became invalid, it remains invalid. And so as a result, that is no longer a valid carbon. And so as a result, what's the case? The case that you're talking about doesn't work. There is no case where a man is bringing a sin offering for his wife. So what's the situation where a man could bring an offering for his wife who goes insane? So Elamiyata Yavi Adam Pesach. So I'm sorry. So the answer is, the implied answer, and the Ron explains it, is that the implied answer is that no, we must only be talking about a yoledet. A yoledet, which is a woman who gives birth, which was one of our mechusar kapara categories. That's the situation where the husband has the ability to bring the chatas, the sin offering, for the woman. It's not an ordinary sin offering. It's a sin offering associated with childbirth. And so that's the situation. And therefore, it is not inconsistent with Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Okay, so now that was...
Why did the first case make it that she separated the carbon before she went insane? Why not just take it on his face if the husband is trying to bring a korban for his wife who's sinned and now insane?
Right. Well, the point is that whenever she became insane, there is no longer an obligation, effectively, to bring the korban. And so, as a result, there is no way.
Separate the korban for her?
No, it's not. The implication is him separating the korban. It was never. It wasn't never required that it was her separating the korban. The bottom line is that it doesn't make a difference when the korban was separated. As soon as she becomes insane, the korban is not going to be valid. So whenever, as long as she's insane, she doesn't have the chatas obligation. And so what's the case where you're bringing this sin offering? So the case is it's got to be only where she gives birth. And that's the situation where even if she's given birth and then she goes insane, so that's the situation where we'll still allow the husband to bring the sacrifice because he doesn't need to be her agent. We don't need her das. That is the key element that Rabbi Yochanan is learning from all of this. So the Gemara brings another effort at trying to challenge Rabbi Yochanan and says, well, one second, what about the Korban Pesach? When we bring the Korban Pesach, it's brought for the entire family, and the family includes children. So why not say that since we bring the Korban Pesach for children, shouldn't we also therefore be able to bring the Korban Pesach for other people? Meaning, just like when we bring a Mechusar Kapara sacrifice, we can bring it for children, and therefore we can bring the Mechusar Kapara sacrifice for other people even without their knowledge. So too, just as we bring the Korban Pesach for children, we could bring the Korban Pesach for somebody without knowledge. That's the question that they're going to ask. That is effectively the answer. Okay, so Elamayata Yavi Adam Pesach Chavero. Let's let a person bring the Korban Pesach for their friend. Shekain Adam maybe Albana Albanosa Vakatanim, because after all, you bring a Korban Pesach for your kids. So Alama Amar Rebbe Elazar, and yet Rebbe Elazar says the following: Hifresh Pesach al Chaveru. If you try to bring a Korban Pesach for your friend, Lo Asaklum, you haven't done anything. So Amar Rebbe Zera Celebes Avos Lav Deoraisa. That this concept of effectively bringing a Korban Pesach on behalf of your entire family, and that everybody needs, that in particular children need to be included in it, is in fact is not a biblical requirement. So if we take a look at the Ran, 2 lines down in the widest lines of the Ran, so the Ran says La'olam b'kihai danan, that in fact we are correct in our analysis. Umiu mi Pesach lo matzi lemidak. You can't learn from the Korban Pesach to celebrate avot lav doraisa. That concept that what we learn from celebrate avot, that everybody needs to be signed on, that even minors need to be signed on, is not biblical. Demina Torah eina katanim tzrichen lehimanot beset. That in fact minor children do not need to be included specifically. If we remember back to when we learned Maseches Pesachim, there's an important concept that everybody needs to have given in their fair share or their piece, some element. They have to have bought into the Korban Pesach, and so that does not apply. What the Ran is saying is that does not apply to children. So, but then of course the question is, if that's true, and yet we have this concept that that everybody needs to be a participant, how could children eat from the Korban Pesach? So Ella Ochlin Memenu Apal Pisha Lo Nimnu. They're allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach, even though they aren't counted in Nimnu Alav, even though they weren't counted in the group. Because even though we have a concept that the Korban Pesach can only be eaten by those who are participating in the group, that only applies to those who are capable of being counted in the group. And but because children are not capable of being counted, therefore they're not able to be included. And so as a result, what we basically said is along the lines of James's answer, that in fact the children are not obligated, and as a result, that's why you can't necessarily learn. So it's different from a Mitzorah or a Zava. Or a Zav situation. In those situations, right, the minor child is obligated is biblically obligated in the Korban, or the Korban, not necessarily that the child is obligated, but a Korban is obligated to be brought for their situation, and as a result, we can bring it and we can learn from that situation. But from Korban Pesach, where it's not a biblical obligation to include them in the group, so as a result, you cannot learn from that.
So why do we think Pesach is a good argument?
Well, the Havamina is that children are equal members of every group, because in fact, from an applied perspective, you do have to include them in each group.
A child should eat part of the Pesach?
Should eat part of the Pesach and has to be counted in that group ahead of time to be considered part of the group. Yeah, absolutely, 100%, exactly. That everybody has to be had in mind, even the children. And now we're going to prove, however, that that's only a rabbinic concept and not a biblical concept. Umimai, and how do I know that in fact this is actually only a rabbinic concept? Mididan, because we had a Mishnah that we learned in Masechet Pesachim. There's a Mishnah on Daf Samach Tet Amud Bet, Samach Tet Amud Aleph. Haomer, Peitet Amud Aleph. Haomer Levanav, if you say to your sons, Hareini Shochet HaPesach, when I get to Yerushalayim, I'm going to slaughter this carbon Pesach. Hareini Shochet Al Mishi Ya'alem Mikem Rishon Yerushalayim. But I'm only going to have in mind whoever of you gets there first. Okay, so that's what he says. But what do we say? It's not going to only work for the person who gets there first. Kaven shehichnis rishon rosho veruba. Once the first one gets a majority of his way into Yerushalayim, zacha bechelko umezacha es achivimo. He acquires his portion, and his siblings acquire their portions. Now we're talking about a minor child here, not an adult. And the point is that this is showing that even though I've expressed only an intention to have one of the children included, the truth is that they're all going to get to be included, because the concept of actually having them in mind is only rabbinic. And so from a biblical perspective, we're going to allow all of them to eat. If you were going to say that in fact the concept of including each child individually was a biblical concept, we have a problem, because the other children are not going to have even reached Yerushalayim. They're not going to even have it in mind. And indeed, the first child may not have gotten there until after the animal was slaughtered. So you can't include somebody after they're slaughtered, after the animal is slaughtered. Well, in second, if that's true, why did the father try and tell them that the only one who's going to get any is the first one in? Is Kedei Lazarzan b'mitzvos. He did so in order to encourage them to be rapid and quick in the fulfillment of doing mitzvot. He was trying to encourage them. And Tanya Nami Haki, we have a brisa that shows this concept, because Masahaya, there was a story where a father made this kind of comment, and to his children, and the daughters got to Yerushalayim first. The Nimtzu Banas Rizos, and we found that, and so what did he learn? He learned that his daughters were more rapid about and more interested in their doing of mitzvot. Uvanim shvalim, and the children were not. They were slow. They weren't. They would work only in their own time. And so the bottom line is that we see that the carbon Pesach offering is a special case, and we can't use the ability to offer a Pesach for a child to teach us that one can offer a Pesach for an adult without their knowledge and intention. So okay, so now that brings us to the next piece in our Mishnah, and our Mishnah said that what? The first piece in our Mishnah, right? Exactly. Actually, the first piece in our Mishnah. So the first piece in our Mishnah, right? The entire Mishnah brought up this concept of whose agents are Kohanim. That led us to this discussion, and now we go back and we look at the individual lines of our Mishnah. So V'Torah is Truma. So we began our Mishnah by noting the fact that the Kohen has the ability to take Truma. So we're going to now explore whose property is being used to take the Truma. So Ibailahu HaTorah Mishalo. If you have somebody who is using their own produce to take truma for somebody else, so I'm nice. I go over to Stan. I see that he's got this pile of tevel, the stuff that truma and meisros have not been yet taken, and I say to him, you know what? I'm going to take truma on your behalf, and I'll use my own produce, and I'll separate it, and I'll have benefited for you. So sorek daito alo. Do I need to let Stan know? Does Stan need to know about this before I do it? Does he have to give me permission or not? And why? What's the two arguments on each side? Me, Amrin and Kevin Hulo. Do I say that because I'm benefiting him from a financial perspective? Lo tzarich das. He doesn't need any knowledge. I'm just giving him a benefit. Odilma mitzvah dilehi. Or maybe no, I'm actually taking Stan's mitzvah. He wants to be able to do the mitzvah of separating truma, and now he's not going to be able to. And he wants to do it himself, and so as a result, I need to get his permission. So we're going to try and bring a proof from our Mishnah. So Tashma Trorim is truma so ves masrosav l'daito. What did we say in our Mishnah? We said in our Mishnah that I need the knowledge of the owner in order for the truma to be taken. Now the problem is remember this Kohen this person who's separating the truma on my behalf, I have sworn off benefiting from that person. So somehow we're going to have to fit into the words of our Mishnah, where I have some knowledge and the person is doing it for me, and yet it's not a benefit for me. So let's take a look and see how could that be. So b'may askinan, what's the case? So we're going to begin with if we say that we'll assume that I have sworn off benefit from James just to provide simplest names to every person, so it'll be a little easier. So James is now going to take truma, and let's assume that he's taking truma using my own stuff. Well, udaito deman, and when we say that it's the knowledge, whose knowledge are we talking about? If we say that it's just James's own knowledge and he's using my stuff to take, well then, man shav shliach, who appointed him as an agent? He doesn't have a right to touch my stuff. He doesn't have that right. It's my stuff. So, elola daito de balakri. So it must be my knowledge that we're talking about. Well, 1 second, hakamahanile. But if I appoint James as my agent to take the truma using my stuff, well then, isn't James doing me a favor? That he's giving me a benefit. And that can't be right? He's giving me a benefit because he's doing my agency. And if that were the case, how could our Mishnah say that James is allowed to do it? So that can't be the case. So we've rejected all possibilities of saying that James was using my stuff to take the truma. So Ella Mishalo al Shalakari, right? So it must be that James is really being very nice to me, and he's using his own stuff to take truma for me. So now Ula Daito Deman. So again, whose knowledge are we talking about? If we say that James is using his own stuff to take truma, and he's using it and he's doing so with my knowledge, well, that's a super benefit. Not only is he doing me the favor of the work that's associated with it, but he's also doing me the favor of giving me the money that I would have lost if it would have been using my own stuff. So elalav l'daite denafshe. So it must be that James knew what he was doing, meaning that the knowledge is, when it says l'daito in our Mishnah, it doesn't mean my knowledge as the owner of the untithed produce. It means James's own knowledge. James was doing it knowing what he was doing. And so clearly, this is a case of James using his own stuff to take truma for somebody else. The amrit sarach das, and if you say that it requires das, hakamahanile, it must be that if it requires my knowledge, then it must be that I would be benefiting. So elalav ain't sarach das. So we answered our question when it comes to can James or can I take the truma, use my own stuff to take truma for Stan? The answer is clearly yes, because that's the case that our Mishnah must be talking about. Our Mishnah must be talking about where James is using his own stuff to take truma on my behalf without my knowledge, exactly, and that the knowledge that it's referring to is James's own knowledge. And so now we are going to, of course, reject this, because la'olam mishal bal hakri al bal hakri. Really, James could be doing it for me using my own stuff. Kida Amar Rava, as Rava is going to explain we're going to see this line later on in this daf, and we're going to see Ba'omer kol harotze litrom yavo v'yitrom. That what is the situation? What is the knowledge that I am offering when it says ladato? So hachinami ba'omer. So too here. So in a different case, which we'll talk about in a few moments, we could talk about and say that the cases where I get up and I say, whoever wishes whoever wants to take the truma, may come and remove truma. Meaning, if you want to come and use my own stuff to remove truma, anybody who wants to do so may come and do so. And so as a result, that's the case that we're talking about here. And so as a result, that is why. So when we said so how does this answer the question? So the case that we talked about in our Mishnah is James is coming to do truma on my behalf using my stuff. Now, how did James have the right to do it? Because I gave anybody the right to do it. Now, I have sufficient knowledge that anybody could do it. So I have sufficient knowledge that James is allowed to work for me. And at the same time, I'm distanced enough from James. He's not affirmatively acting as my agent. And so as a result, even though James is doing it for and I have some quote unquote benefit, because I've essentially allowed anybody to do it, James can do it even though I've sworn off benefit from him. Okay, does that make sense? So now the problem is, and the Ron asks this question, I won't go through it inside due to lack of time, but the Ron asked a great question, because we have in the concept of gittin, where if I were to say to somebody, you know what, whoever hears my voice, can give a get, should give a get to my wife. In that case, the person who hears my voice and decides, oh, okay, I'll write the get and I'll give it to his wife, is considered my agent. Right. So what's the difference between this language of whoever hears my voice and the language of whoever wants? And so where in the case of whoever hears my voice, the person is my agent. And where in the case of whoever wants, the person is not my agent, but is able to do it. Not only that, but there's a third situation, because there is a concept of whoever does X will not lose. Like whoever will, give something to my wife will not lose, meaning that I commit to repay that person. So basically, the Ron creates three categories. There's a category where I've expressed sufficient wishes so that when James takes the truma, so he's taking the truma, he's not my agent, but I've given him permission, and so as a result, it's a valid case of taking truma. On the other hand, if I actually use the language of whoever hears my voice, then it's almost like a command. Whoever hears my voice should give my wife a get. So that is not, that's a one level above, meaning not only have I expressed my wishes, but I've actually expressed my intention that anybody who does so should serve as my agent. And on the other hand, if I just say whoever does X will not lose, so then I have not necessarily expressed my direct wishes. I've not made anybody an agent. And so as a result, the Ron suggests, although he's not 100% sure, that may not even work for truma. So basically, there are different categories of the amount of will that one can express. And the point is here, when one says that whoever wants to do something may do it, that is only a giving of permission and not a language of agency. So that's what the Ron says there. All right. So by minei. So now a related question. So by minei, Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera, "HaTorah mishalo al shalchet bayro." If I take truma from my own on for Stan, meaning I use my own produce to take the truma and give to the Kohen on behalf of Stan, Tovas hana shel mi. The Tovas hana refers to the fact that a Kohen or other person has the right to appreciate the fact that you gave them truma. Meaning, if you give, the particular case is, let's say you give, my daughter marries a Kohen. And so as a result, my grandchildren are Kohanim. So I come to you and I say, Stan, listen, do me a favor. When you go give your truma, give it to my grandson. And if you give it to my grandson, I'll drive you to the doctors next week. So I'm not giving you a humongous benefit. I'm giving you a small benefit. So I'm allowed to do that. So the question is now, in the case where I have given truma on your behalf, and let's say it's James' grandson who is the Kohen, and so James has offered to give us to give us a little something on behalf of the fact that we're helping his grandson out. So who gets it? Do you get it because it was your underlying produce, or do I get it because I was the one who gave it? So that's the question that Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking to Rabbi Zera. So me, I'm reading on ilav peri dehayich mi metakna karya dehahu. Do we say that if not for the fact that I use my own fruits and vegetables to separate your truma, you would not have had your truma fixed, and so therefore I should get it. O dilma ilav karya dehahu. Or if it wasn't for your underlying produce, lo havim peri dehajent truma, there wouldn't be any truma obligation in the first place. So the question is does the right go to the person who's created the obligation, or to the one who's fulfilled the obligation?
You're using your own produce?
I'm using my own produce. That's what makes it an interesting question, right? So that's why maybe I would say that I should get the benefit from you as opposed to Stan, because whose stuff was I really using? I'm using. But I wouldn't be able to give you truma. I wouldn't be able to give that truma, but for. That's true. That's true. I could do that. But I want to also benefit Stan. So Amar Lay, Rabbi Zera responds, Amar Kra es kol tuas zaracha v'nasata. Now these words are not all part of one pasuk. It's actually the first few words as kol tuas zaracha are perek yudalid pasuk kaf bet in Dvarim. We're almost done. And then pasuk v'nasata is in pasuk kaf hey. So what does it mean? It means that the entire crop of your planting is kol tuas zaracha, and then it says v'nasata. So the point is that according to Rabbi Zera, what Rabbi Zera is saying here is that we're connecting the planting to the giving. And so the one who does the planting, namely Stan, is the one who should get the benefit because he did the planting. It was on his underlying produce. So even though I'm the one who's giving it, that's the situation.
So talking about an actual reciprocal gift, or just talking about like
it is there's got to be something to it, because obviously if we're just talking about the emotional component, we can both have that. So there's something that there.
Goodwill.
Yeah, it's the goodwill. It's whom do you owe the goodwill? As you're the grandfather of this Kohen, who do you owe the? It does not have to be tangible, but the key aspect is it's from your perspective. Obviously, from our own perspective, who should you be really thinking? That's exactly right. Okay, that may be the right answer, exactly. But all right, so now we're going to, so Rabbi Zera says we should be thanking Stan. So now we're going to challenge that. So Esvei, 1 second, Torah is trumaso, trumasav, esmas rosavla daito. If you separate the trumas and ties with the other person's consent, the amra tobas hanash de baal hakri. Now, if you say, so we said in our Mishnah that a Kohen against whom I've sworn off benefiting is allowed to take truma for me, right? And we say hakamahani, well, but if I get the benefit, if Stan's the one who owns the pile and is considered to be benefiting when I take the truma because he's going to get the tovas hana, well, then when I take the truma for him, for sure he's getting a benefit. How could I take the truma for him? He gets the tovas hana. So ela shmamina tovas hana delay. So it must be that the tovas hana belongs to the person who separates it, because if it belongs to the owner of the pile, well then how could the person be taking it away? So amre lo mishel bal hakri al shal bal hakri. So again, that case is not a case of Stan, of me taking my own truma and for on behalf of Stan, but rather it's me taking truma for Stan from Stan, and therefore udaito de balakri, and we're talking about with Stan's consent. Ba'omer, and this is the language that we saw earlier. Ba'omer kolarots litrom yavol litrom, and the point is Stan is saying anybody who wants to give truma on my behalf is welcome to do so. But the fact that Stan is getting the tovas hana that exists irrespective of me because it's his own stuff that is being used. So as a result, that's not going to be the situation. So, all right, so we tried one challenge. And so now we're going to end by just simply stating a teaching. Oh, I realize I should have rotated this. Okay, so now the screen shows the full result. So now Tashma, so now the Gemara is going to reject Rabbi Zera's teaching completely and teach us three rulings that Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. To Rabbi Abahu, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan three things. Only the third one relates to our topic. So we'll go through the first two very quickly, and with the third one we'll finish. So Hamakdish Mosif Chomish. If you say something is hektish, let's say Stan is obligated to bring a korban, and I, in my generosity, decide to sanctify my animal as the korban that Stan is going to bring, and now this animal becomes has a blemish. So as a result, if we want to be able to use this animal, I need to redeem it. Now, the owner of the animal who redeems it, if the owner redeems it himself as opposed to selling it into the market, he needs to add a chomish, which is basically a 25% penalty to make sure that he's given a fair market value. So who is in this situation obligated to give the chomish? Is Stan obligated to give the chomish if he does the redemption, or am I obligated because it was my animal? So the answer is that it's the one who is makdish it, the one who consecrated it. So me, if I am the one who redeems it, so then I have to add a fifth. Umiskaper osich. Not only that, but when it comes to, again, same situation, what if there's a halacha of tamura? The halacha of tamura is as follows. If I have a korban that is set aside for something, and I say, you know what, I don't want to use that animal, I want to use this animal. And I say, I'm moving the holiness of this animal to that animal. Well, then both animals end up being holy. All right, so I'm stuck. I actually have now two animals that I'm going to bring as sacrifices. So the question is, again, same situation. I've separated a korban on behalf for Stan, and Stan's the one who wants to bring it. Now the question is if only the owner of the animal can do tamura. If you don't have any relationship with the animal and you say, I want to move this coded kedusha to that animal, you don't have the ability to do that. So what about in this situation where I've separated the animal on behalf of Stan? Does Stan have the ability to do tamura, or do I have? And so here again, Rabbi Yochanan answers, umiskaper osa tamura. It's Stan that has the ability to do tamura, not me. And finally, hatorah mishalo al she'ena shalo tovas hana shalo. That if I take truma from my own stuff on behalf of Stan, then the tovas hana goes to me. And so we have resolved the question that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, and we have rejected Rabbi Zera's teaching, and we have said that in fact the one who uses their own stuff, the person whose stuff it is, that's the person who gets the tovas hana. Now tomorrow, we learned yesterday in the Mishnah that there's a distinction between Midrash Halacha and Agada, which may be taught by someone who cannot benefit from their teacher, as opposed to Tanakh, verses from Tanakh, which cannot be taught. And so why does our Mishnah make that distinction? So for the answer to that question, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Now, tomorrow, please note, I will not be teaching. Take a look on the WhatsApp. I assume that it's going to be only Zoom, so don't, all right? But assume that it will be only Zoom with Dove, but just in case, be sure to take a look, and we will pick up from here, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you.
I will be back on Friday, and I will look forward to learning with you all then. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Claudia,
Yes.
I think it's gonna rain today, so.
For rain.